I went off to college. I went to Vanderbilt, and I was very successful academically and socially. But I wasn't having a very good time. And everybody was telling me what a great time I must be having, living the dream. And it didn't feel that way. But at the same time, I didn't really know any other way to be in the world other than, sort of this like work really hard at school and then party really hard. And when I was about 19 or 20, I kind of recognized that I had a problem because even on the nights that I didn't want to, I found myself drinking to excess, using drugs. And I remember I came home one summer and I kind of told my parents, I think I have a problem. And they said, no. They said, no, you don't. Like, you're getting great grades. Like, you're an officer in your fraternity. Like, an alcoholic is someone who can't do their job because they're drinking so much. They're someone who's being isolated from society because of their problem with alcohol. And you're, doing wonderfully.
Substance use disorder touches all our lives, and often we feel hopeless or frustrated in our pursuit to understand how and why it happens.
Welcome to APC Recovery Cafe, where we discuss the topics and trends around substance use, provide education and resources, offer recovery support, and also discuss prevention tactics, all through the stories of the people who have been there.
We invite you to grab your favorite coffee or tea and join us for a variety of guests that will bring understanding, information, connection, and hope.
Together, we can break the stigma and pave a brighter future for each other.
Hi folks, welcome into this episode of APC's Recovery Cafe. I'm Art Wimberly. I'm a person grateful to be in long-term recovery and a volunteer with the Addiction Prevention Coalition. And today in studio, we have my co-host, the Executive Director of APC, Carrie.
Hey, Art.
Hey, good morning.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, and our conversation today is with Randy Hall. Randy is also a person in long-term recovery, the president of Recovery Dharma, national president. Is that correct, Randy?
That is correct, yes.
And so we're going to get Randy to share his story with us today, but also talk about Recovery Dharma and the impact it's having in his life and in the recovery community in the Birmingham area. But first, Carrie, I think you've got his special drink.
Yes. Okay, so I can honestly say that we have never had a drink such as this on the Recovery Cafe. So this is from Smoothie King, and it's lean. What is it? Fit and lean. Lean and fit. No.
This is a Slim and Trim.
Slim and Trim. Oh, so close.
That was
Veggie smoothie.
A veggie smoothie.
That's right.
So what did they put in that blender to make it that green?
There are a lot of things in this, and I do not know what they all are. There's definitely some kale. And There's definitely some spinach.
Okay.
And then there's really a cornucopia of different fruits, I think, like mango and pineapple and some sweet things to make it taste, a little bit better. And some vegan protein and lots of vitamins and minerals.
Wow.
And it's a very healthy snack for me.
So not for you.
no, not so much for me.
Yeah.
No,
But it's a lovely green color.
It is. It's
really
beautiful.
nice.
I used to not drink anything green about 5 years ago, other than maybe like green beer on St. Patrick's Day. I think I would have that once a year. But in recovery, I've started to kind of go the other direction and become much more healthier and intentional with what I put in my body.
Good for you.
So I really just drink water or green smoothies. That's basically
Wow.
the extent of my beverage choices now, which is really cool because, for a long time I lived a life of sort of gluttony and sort of like reckless disregard for what I put in my body. So now in recovery, trying to take better care of myself so I can take better care of others. And
Right.
so part of that is drinking things that are healthy for me.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. We really do appreciate your time. I know you recently came to our family support group and shared, and I was so struck by your story and watching the other parents, lean in, because we learn so much from people as they share, but also your passion about Dharma recovery and educating us about that and smart recovery. I told Art, I really want to do this podcast because I want other people to hear, because even though I've been in this space for 20 years, I really didn't know that much about Dharma or SMART. So can you take us back with your story and just share a little bit of, and bring us up to today? And then that kind of inspires us with your passion of what you're doing today, knowing the backstory. So we'd
Sure.
love for you to share that with us.
Definitely. So I was born in Tampa, Florida, and I grew up with my two brothers and my parents. And it was kind of grew up in that culture of alcohol that many people grow up in. You know, like in my household, the children drank milk and the adults drank wine or beer or liquor, right?
Yep,
And
yep.
all their friends did as well. It was just sort of what was expected. Once you got to be a certain age, around 15, 16, you'd start drinking. And when I was growing up, there was a lot of expectations put on me, I think, by others and by myself, I think, just expectations for achievement. And it was very stressful. I went to a very difficult and, I guess you could say, school where it was expected that you would go to a good college and all these sort of things. And part of living into that image of being successful was sort of being popular, you know, which when you got to be 15, 16 years old meant ingesting mood-altering substances pretty much. And that was part of my story, you know. In an effort to be accepted, I sort of found this magic elixir called alcohol, and it was very helpful in being like running with the popular crowd, if you will. And so I started drinking when I was about 15 or so, and started smoking marijuana around the same time. And, you know, when I was that age, I kind of, like many kids that age, I think I knew everything. You know, like
Yep.
you couldn't tell me anything at that point. I had mastered it, this thing called life. And I kind of understood very little, but I thought that I understood a lot. So I went off to college. I went to Vanderbilt, and I was very successful academically and socially. But I wasn't having a very good time. And everybody was telling me what a great time I must be having, you know, living the dream. And it didn't feel that way. But at the same time, I didn't really know any other way to be in the world other than, you know, sort of this like work really hard at school and then party really hard. I would say on the weekends, but it wasn't on the weekends. It was pretty much every day of the week. And when I was about 19 or 20, I kind of recognized that I had a problem, because even on the nights that I didn't want to, I found myself drinking to excess, using drugs. And I remember I came home one summer and I kind of told my parents, you know, I think I have a problem. And they said, no. They said, no, you don't. Like, you're getting great grades. Like, you're, you know, an officer.
How could you be having a problem?
Right. You're an officer in your fraternity. Like, an alcoholic is someone who can't do their job because they're drinking so much. They're someone who's being isolated from society because of their problem with alcohol. And you're, you know, doing wonderfully. And it rang false to me at the time, but I kind of wanted it to be true. So I kind of ran with that. And I'm not blaming them in any way for this. They did a great job, and they were doing the best that they could based on the capacity and understanding that they had and had been passed down to them. And in many ways, they were trying to like really, they wanted me to achieve highly because they thought that would bring happiness and stability to my life. So any sort of external pressure they were putting on me, I think, was coming from an intention of love. And it just sort of went haywire a little bit, you know. But anyways, after college, I became a lawyer, and I really wanted to be the best lawyer. And I didn't have the strongest like moral and ethical framework for living at that time. So I found myself frequently like bending and breaking the rules to win cases. And part of that was an amphetamine habit that I started to develop, where I would take amphetamines during the day in order to bill more hours, in order to sort of, you know, I really thought that it made me smarter, but it was, I think in hindsight, only making me more manic. But at the time, I really felt like this drug is helping me focus and making me smarter. So throughout the day, I would take amphetamines to sort of, you know, be able to produce these superhuman results at work. And then at night, I would drink and use marijuana to kind of come down and rest. And I thought that this was, sort of delusionally, I thought that I could live this way and that there would be no repercussions or consequences for me physically or socially.
Yeah, the rules didn't apply.
No, I was exempt from the human experience. You know,
Yeah.
I could use these drugs like a chemist in order to control my emotions, well, really to neutralize my emotions, right? Because through my job, you know, I worked at one of the biggest firms in town, and I worked on some of the biggest cases, mostly like white-collar criminal cases. And the work itself was not resonating with me. In fact, it made me feel very spiritually and morally bankrupt, really. And I was like defending these people that were massive frauds, and I sort of felt like a massive fraud because I was ignoring my conscience is what I was ignoring. And I was telling myself that it was worth it for the money. In fact, I used to get up in the morning and take my medicine, right? Abuse my medicine.
Yeah.
And I would look in the mirror and I'd say, "You can do this today, man. You're a sociopath. You can do this." And I was like, in hindsight, I was like, that's the worst pep talk that you could possibly give yourself, right? You're a sociopath. But I wanted to believe it because if I was a sociopath, then I didn't have to feel bad about what I was doing.
Yeah.
The length of time that you were able to use and still do your job, I mean, both in school and work, is shocking from somebody looking, from the outside looking in. That's pretty amazing.
I was somewhat high functioning, I guess. I was really
You had college and law school,
correct.
and then what, a decade or so
Right.
at law, right?
Right.
So you're right.
Long time.
That's a long time. You were more than functioning, right?
I was holding it together sometimes by a thread,
Yeah.
and sometimes not holding it together, right? I'd have 2 weeks of really amazing productivity, and then I'd have a week sometimes of just complete crash because, I mean, you just can't continue to do that to yourself nonstop for that long.
So you mentioned, your parents in kind of an unknowing way, when you said, "I think I've got a problem," they kind of smoothed that over just based on what they knew at the time, right?
Right.
It sounds almost like perhaps because you were successful in your profession as well, that perhaps some of that kind of got overlooked in some way, whereas in other people in other jobs, that might not have happened to them. Somebody would have noticed quickly and maybe stepped in.
That's very possible. And I've thought about that through the years, sort of like, I think it had to have been obvious to some of the people that I worked with what was happening. And I question whether they didn't stop me because it was benefiting them. When I was on, and I was very good. And then when I was off, I think maybe they would forgive that because they knew I'd be back on again. So I kind of became notorious for the ability to crank things out at a high level in a short period of time. And that's a valuable skill in the legal world. What ended up happening is after many years, obviously, of doing this job that I really never enjoyed, I'm kind of a conflict-averse person. And being a corporate litigator is, you argue with people all day.
Yeah.
So it was really not resonating with my personality or with my moral code, though I didn't want to admit that at the time. So one day I just went in and I just quit my job. And I, called the partners around the table and told them I'm finished. And they were shocked. And my wife was shocked because I had not really communicated very well with her about my intention to do that. And at the time, it felt like a life or death decision to me. Like, I need to stop being a lawyer. And this was my lack of understanding at the time, right? If I could just stop being a lawyer, then I could stop being a drug addict, was what I was thinking. I was thinking that, I was putting the cart before the horse, if you will, and thinking it's this lifestyle and this job that's externally, causing me to engage in this behavior.
Yeah.
So I decided, I had some, at the time I felt like I had really bad karma. So I was like, I want to get some good karma and balance this thing out. So I thought I'll become a teacher. And that's what I did. I went back to UAB and I got my master's in education. And typically you have to get licensed and certified before you can teach. But at the time, Carver High School downtown in North Birmingham had an emergency position available where you could teach without your certificate. So basically, as soon as I went back to school, I got this job at Carver High School, and I was basically thrown right into the fire, right? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that being a teacher would be less stressful than being a lawyer, but being a teacher at Carver High School, and I think really anywhere, but especially at Carver, was not less stressful. Yeah. And that same problem that plagued me with the drugs followed me. You know, I kind of had that idea, like many do, of a geographical cure.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
I just move
Yeah.
and change what I'm doing externally. But the truth is that nothing externally was going to, you know, change what was happening to me internally. This sort of the spiritual void that I was feeling. And I was a great teacher. I really was. And I cared a lot about my kids. And I loved those kids. And those kids taught me more than I taught them about resilience and about, you know, really the different ways that intelligence can be represented in people. And honestly, it was a life-changing experience, and I'm so glad I did it. And I did it for about 4 years. And I have wonderful memories from that time. And then, you know, I had this sort of life-changing experience with this illness that I acquired in 2017. So I was teaching, and I was still abusing the drugs, and still drinking a lot, still smoking a lot of marijuana. And my entire lifestyle, you know, like I was saying when we started, was not geared towards taking care of my body. And I felt very disconnected from my body. And I was treating my body really poorly, killing it in a way. And I think my body decided to teach me a lesson. and it was a very painful lesson, but I acquired this disease called Guillain-Barré Syndrome. And what happened is I was just coaching my daughter's soccer game, her under-6 soccer game, and sort of running around on the field after the kids as they followed the ball, like, you know, little bumblebee soccer. And both my feet went numb at the same time. And I remember thinking, like, that is so weird. You know, I've never experienced a feeling like this before. But I didn't really think anything of it. And then that night, I started to lose feeling in my hands, and they started to tingle as well. And I thought, this is so strange. But I didn't really do anything about it because I just kind of figured, you know, you've been abusing these drugs and this could be some sort of side effect of that. And if you just go to bed, you'll wake up tomorrow and you'll feel better. Well, I woke up the next day and I felt really weak, started to have a little trouble breathing. So I went to the emergency room and they said there was nothing wrong with me. And then I went to my primary care physician and he said there was nothing wrong with me. And then I went back to the emergency room that night in an ambulance. And again, they looked at my blood and stuff, and they said, there's nothing wrong with him. They actually told my wife, it's all in his head. And my wife wheeled me out to the car in a wheelchair. And I was thinking, like, maybe it is in my head. I'm telling my legs to move, but they're not moving. So I woke up the next day, and I could hardly move at all. And I could hardly breathe at all. So my wife took me back to the emergency room. And I was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré Syndrome, which is this rare autoimmune disease. About 1 in 100,000 people get it. And basically what happens is it's an ascending paralysis. It starts at your toes, and it's your fingers, and it kind of works in towards the center of your body, and then from the bottom of your body to the top of your body. And your nerves throughout your body are coated with this stuff called myelin. And it's sort of like the little plastic covering on electrical wires. It kind of protects your nerves from damage. And what Guillain-Barré syndrome does is it strips that myelin from all of your nerves, and then it does damage to the underlying axons. So there's many causes of it, and nobody really knows why I got Guillain-Barré syndrome. It could have been an infection that I got from a small surgery that I'd had about 10 days earlier. It could have been from an upper respiratory infection that I'd had about 2 weeks prior. It could have been from some questionable chicken enchiladas that I ate in Gulf Shores about 2 weeks prior. But at the end of the day, at the end of that day, I was paralyzed from head to toe on many different types of life support, ventilator, feeding tube. And I remained that way for about 2 months. And I was in the neuro ICU at UAB, and I was completely locked in my body, unable to talk or see because my eye muscles were paralyzed, unable to breathe because your diaphragm is a muscle, and locked in my body and sort of subjected to a psychological and physical hellscape, if you will.
Yeah, it seems like terror.
It was. It's difficult to articulate just how painful it was. And even like talking about it now, I can like feel sort of those traumatic memories, right?
So, question, during all the time that they were trying to diagnose and then diagnosed you, were they aware of the level of your abuse of substance?
No, they were not.
Okay.
Nobody was. So
Yep.
like another thing that I was undergoing during that 60 days was withdrawal from all my various substances of choice. And I was really, subject to just these like really hellish hallucinations and depraved delusions. Like anybody will tell you who's been in the ICU for as long as I was, especially without the ability to communicate with others, that the brain sort of just retreats inwards and sort of creates its own reality, because the reality that I was living in was just too scary. So I would kind of come in and out of that throughout the day. And I went some beautiful places as well. The human mind is really an amazing thing. And I spent a lot of time with mine. And it was, in the end, a good thing for me. I learned how to meditate in doing that. But yes, it was psychologically traumatic. It filled me with despair at the time. Obviously, I had this idea that I'd done it to myself, which people assure me that probably wasn't the case. But even if it wasn't, I kind of put myself in a bad condition for that to happen to me. And I almost died several times. Being on the ventilator that long, I had several really serious pneumonias and had to have numerous bronchoscopies, like more than half dozen, which are, basically life-saving procedures where they come in and get mucus plugs out of your lungs. And I even, at one point, had to be revived with the paddles, Wow. All in all, it was, those 2 months were the longest 2 months of my life. And at the same time, it was exactly kind of what I needed to happen, because for 2 months, I couldn't hurt myself anymore. Yeah. I was literally paralyzed. I'd been paralyzed emotionally and psychologically for a long time by my drug addiction, and I needed to be paralyzed physically. So it's a great example of the last thing that I possibly would ever have wanted to happen to me, and it was the best possible thing that could have happened to me.
Wow.
Now, you were married at this time.
I was married, and I had 3 children. And at that time, my children were 7, 3, and 1.
Wow.
And my wife, who is just an amazing, stable, and supportive and beautiful person, managed, to work full time, to be with me at the ICU every day, and to arrange care for my children. And my parents came and stayed at my house for a while. My older brother came and stayed and came and sat with me in the ICU every day. My community out in Liberty Park really rallied around me and supported my family. And it really, I had lost faith in people before that. And that was kind of what, part of my despair before I got sick was this idea that nobody really cared what I did to myself, because at the end of the day, nobody cared about me. So there was this realization of look at this beautiful thing where all these people are coming together and rallying around me. And it really restored my faith in humanity in many ways. So after, those 2 months at UAB, I went to this neurorehabilitation center in Atlanta, Georgia, called the Shepherd Center. And at the Shepherd Center, that's really where I did the hard work of kind of building me back again, sort of, like the $6 million man, and it almost cost about that much. But that place is just a really sacred place to me. They treat a lot of adolescents with spinal cord injuries, so it's a very vibrant, almost like a camp type experience there, with a lot of group work and a lot of going outside of the hospital to do various events and things. And it was exactly what I needed, was to be surrounded by that kind of positivity and gratefulness and generosity. And it really kept me from falling into a pit of self-pity, which could have easily happened, being paralyzed head to toe and being unable to move or be with my family. It would have been very easy to fall into a deep depression, but that's not what happened at all. In fact, I sort of, I did do a lot of hard work. At that place, again, I got 6 hours of therapy a day, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and psychological therapy, which I was really surprised at the time, and I'm glad that they did that. They recognized that this new normal that I was living in, that I was going to need mental health with, mental health with that.
Did anybody yet know that you had such a tremendous struggle with substance abuse before?
My wife knew. Over the years, there had been instances where, I had stolen pills or done things that had sort of called attention to the problem, and I would kind of downplay it, minimize it. And, those close to me, my friends, the evidence was there. It's something that often isn't talked about in families, because at the end of the day, people try to help, and people really can't help. They can create the conditions to be helpful and be supportive. But at the end of the day, if the individual isn't ready, willing, and able to get better, there's nothing that anyone can do.
And families struggle with, okay, what is helpful? And what should we say? What can we say? We talk about this in our family group all the time, helpful, helping. So especially family is a little bit on the outside. They don't really know how to address it, that's in a helpful way. So
we either tend to
leaves
think
a gap.
We either tend to think we're overly responsible and it's up to us to make it happen.
Right. And then,
or we withdraw in some way.
Right.
Which neither one generally tends to help a lot. Yeah.
For sure. And again, I had held it together. As a child, I became very good at managing other people's perceptions and sort of creating the appearance of having everything together, almost the appearance of perfection, because when I was a child, that's how I felt safe. So I've kind of took that and ran with it, and that kind of became like my personality, if you will. Like I would just adapt to whatever group that I was kind of flung into, and that made me a great attorney in many ways because I could be whoever the decision maker wanted me to be. I could become that person for that moment. And the same thing in making friends throughout the years. And something that I sort of ignored was the fact that if I was always having to wear a mask to get other people to like me, then they didn't really like me. They just liked the mask. And but I became very good at crafting and wearing those masks. And that sort of contributed to making me feel like a husk of a person. So, when I got sick and I recognized that people really cared about me and it didn't have anything to do with what I could produce or, how much success I had had, that was sort of a paradigm shift for me where I realized that people accepted me as I was and that I didn't have to be any different. And I don't think if that had happened to me in 2017, that I would have started my recovery journey in 2018. Basically what happened is when I was in the hospital there for about 6 months, I was on a bunch of new drugs. And I didn't have my old drugs, but now I had hydrocodone and Xanax and fentanyl and tramadol. And these drugs were being managed for me for a long time. They were being, given to me under the care of a doctor.
Yeah, and they had no clue you'd struggled before.
Exactly. They'd had no clue. And every 3 hours when they came around, my pain level was at a 9 because I knew I had to say 9 in order to get the drugs. Mm-hmm. And it became another way to sort of like suppress the emotions that I was having. And I was also in pretty incredible physical pain.
Right.
I mean, Guillain-Barré Syndrome, again, it's hard to articulate when that's stripped off your nerves, like any sort of touch. It's strange because like you're paralyzed, you can't move anything, but if anybody is to touch you, or if your foot's just like slightly, and you can't move it, it can be incredibly painful.
Wow.
So for a long time, I needed the drugs. But then a certain point came where I knew that I didn't necessarily need them anymore, but I continued to take them in excess. And once they allowed me to have control of them, I immediately began taking 2 instead of 1. And about a month after that, I recognized like, oh my gosh, like this is going to kill me like really quickly if I do this. And I've been gifted this second chance.
So really there was a shift from the original struggle, which was more amphetamines and alcohol up and then down. Now it's opiates and benzodiazepines, right?
Right.
Okay.
It's just numb. Just want to be numb because the reality of my situation was such that it was going to take a long time for me to get better. And at the time, I was really feeling like, I was having a lot of anxiety about my future, right? And my ability to be a good father and go back to work and whatnot. So what ended up happening is I felt really dejected a lot. And my wife actually was the one that turned me around. She said, I would just feel so overwhelmed. I couldn't hold a fork. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't go to the restroom by myself. I couldn't do any of these things. And the idea of being able to do it all again was very overwhelming to me. And she told me one day, she's like, how do you eat an elephant? And I was like, eat an elephant? Like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. You don't eat an elephant. It's too big, And she's like, no, you can eat an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? I was like, I don't know. She said, 1 bite at a time. And I was like, okay. And that kind of became like my mantra. in my recovery from Guillain-Barré Syndrome. Like, just get up today, go to physical therapy, and try to do a little bit more than you did yesterday. Like today, maybe you can get yourself in the wheelchair. Tomorrow, next week, 2 weeks from now, maybe you'll be able to transfer from the wheelchair onto the bed. And just looking at it that way, just one step at a time, one bite at a time. And I think that's kind of become a mantra for living my life, and it's been very helpful in addiction recovery as well.
How did you get connected to Recovery Dharma?
So yes, when I was in UAB, they would take us on the druggy buggy to an AA meeting every day. And they would take us all over Birmingham area, which was a beautiful thing because you kind of recognize like, oh, no matter where we went, on the little buggy on the way there, everybody would have a story about that area, like, oh yeah, I threw up in that alley one time, or whatever. And to recognize that there was a room of people near all these places where you could go and you could share and be yourself and be accepted and find support, that was a beautiful thing, and I'm glad they did that. But what did happen also is like in those AA rooms, the actual like underlying principles of like powerlessness and the whole higher power element of that, it wasn't really resonating with my underlying belief system. And I'll never talk poorly about any recovery program because I know how much it means to so many people. And I just think for each unique individual, maybe there's a unique path. And the feeling that I got was that my path was not going to be through AA. And that was sort of saddening because I didn't really know if there was any other alternatives. So luckily for me, I had been introduced to Smart Recovery a little bit before and kind of looked at that. So I knew that was out there. But then when I was at UAB, they asked me one day if I wanted to talk to the Buddhist chaplain. And I was like, I don't know anything about Buddhism, but I do know that it's real boring up here on the third floor of the psych building. The days get real long when you don't have your phone or TV and you're in group therapy. And I was like, sure, I'll talk to the Buddhist chaplain. So the Buddhist chaplain comes up, this guy named Al Cotton, and he gives me this book called The Refuge Recovery Book. And the Refuge Recovery Book was written by Noah Levine, and it's a book that talks about using Buddhist-inspired practices and principles to overcome addictions of all kinds. And this book changed my life. I had never been a religious person, and what I liked about it is it was a very secular approach to Buddhism and recovery. You didn't have to believe in anything other than your own capacity to change and heal your life. And so I decided that I was going to try these meetings, these Refuge Recovery meetings. And shortly after I joined Refuge Recovery in Birmingham, became Recovery Dharma, there was sort of a schism. And so I'll just refer to it as Recovery Dharma going forward. So I went to this Recovery Dharma meeting, and it was over at the Shambhala Center in near Avondale. And I just remember walking in, and it's just a feeling that I got immediately, a feeling of like acceptance. I saw people, they were laughing, they seemed to get along, they seemed to be living a life of ease. And I'd seen a lot of white knuckling at some of these other meetings. So I was very attracted, and I thought whatever these people are doing, I'm going to do it and see if it works. So I started meditating, and I started attending these meetings. And yeah, it really changed my life and in a really positive way. And I finally felt like I had this ethical framework for living that I'd never really had before. I was kind of taught the golden rule, and that was basically the extent of what I was given, which arguably don't need anything else, right? But I did need some more structure to my belief system, I think. I started going to these meetings in Birmingham, and we're very lucky to have a thriving community of Recovery Dharma here in Birmingham. And I just fell in love with the program and with the people. I always tell people, like, I don't really care which group you're a part of, but go out, find a group, because I think community is really the most important aspect of the recovery program. Finding people that you can be yourself with, finding people that you like so that you like to go to the meetings. To me, that's really the whole of the path in many ways. There's a place for self-reflection in that type of work as well. And really, Recovery Dharma was, the best for me in connecting to myself and connecting with other people. The practices that we do in Recovery Dharma, like meditation, self-reflective inquiries, which are kind of akin to the steps, those things are really great for connecting me to me and sort of like diving deeper into these patterns of habitual behavior, compulsive behavior, impulsive behavior that I'm trying to avoid, but then also cultivating these states of mind and feeling like generosity, compassion, joy, that are going to create a life for me that I don't want to run away from. Because so often addiction is like a rejection of reality.
Yep.
But if my life is such that I don't want to run away from it, then I don't need these mood-altering substances to sort of escape. So I like how it kind of has that defensive and offensive approach to it. And then, with the community, what a great opportunity to practice loving kindness with others, to help others, to be of service to others.
So don't want to put you on the spot, but if somebody just wanted to talk to you, whether it's about SMART or Recovery Dharma or any aspect of recovery, would you mind giving out a way for them to get in touch with you?
For sure. If you could email me at Randall, Randall, at recoverydharma.org, and you'll have access to me, and I'd love to help anybody. Like I said, helping others helps me. So sort of a wise selfishness, I guess, in a way of like, sure, I'm more than happy to help. And again, like that connection with others, that empathy, like that's the good stuff. Like the euphoria that I feel from connecting with another human being and helping another human being and allowing myself to be helped by another human being, like that's my new addiction, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for opportunities to connect with other people.
Well, Randy, thanks for coming in today. Thanks for what
Thank
you're doing.
you so much. Thank you for what you do. I mean, it's evident how much passion and enthusiasm you have for this, for your recovery, for what you're doing in your recovery. And that's really, comes full circle is what we're trying to do here with this podcast. This is going back and letting people tell their stories that explains, the glow that you have. So thank you for what you do in our community, and thank you for what you do for so many people. It really does make a difference. So.
Thanks again, folks. Join us next time for APC Recovery Cafe.
One of the things that APC is known for is being a connector, because we're stronger together.
Not only are we there for those who are suffering through substance use disorder, but we're there for family members, and we really take our job seriously.
We all have personal reason why we're in this field. We're changing people's lives one community at a time.